together over the next few days. I want to start out by thanking our hotel staff team. They are just a fantastic team to work with and a big part of the reason that makes this such a great and enjoyable event. And many of them have been with that team for many years. I think, and there's some discussion around whether this is accurate, that this is the conference's 17th year, Julie? 17 years in and going strong. And this is the 11th year since Water Education Colorado got involved. We're one of the 3 conference partners along with the Colorado Riparian Association and Colorado Watershed Assembly that host this annual conference. Chris Sturm, I don't know where you are. I saw him at the registration desk yesterday, and so I think this could be some proof of how many years the conference has been running. He says he's got one of our collector cups from every year, and when he retires, he's gonna donate the complete set to our fundraising efforts, so I'm sure that will bring in a pretty penny. So I'm Jayla Poppleton. I'm the executive director at Water Education Colorado, and again, one of your 3 conference hosts for the event. I'm also your conference chair this year. That's a role that we rotate among our organizations each year. So myself and the rest of the team at Water Education Colorado, and there's a few of us up here, we go by WECO for short. We're pleased to do this work alongside our great partners, the Colorado Riparian Association and Colorado Watershed Assembly. Briefly, our missions, which are different. The Colorado Watershed Assembly's mission is to provide support to watershed organizations throughout the state to promote conservation values of land and water. The Colorado Riparian Association's mission is to promote conservation, restoration, and preservation of Colorado's riparian areas and wetlands. And Water Education Colorado's mission is to ensure that Coloradans are informed on critical water issues and equipped to make smart decisions for a sustainable water future. So together, we love to work on this mutual goal of fostering knowledge exchange and exposure to a wide variety of perspectives and practices and tools that can advance our collective work in this field. This year's a special year. It's a milestone year for Colorado Water for a number of reasons. It's the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. It's the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. It's also the 125th anniversary of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And it's the year that the Colorado Water Plan is being updated to keep pace with our evolving challenges in the state. These milestones are the basis for the year-long public awareness campaign that Water Education Colorado is spearheading statewide this year called Water 22. And if you haven't come across it or heard about it yet, we encourage you to stop by our booth back here in the Rapids room. The 3 partners have materials set out and we can tell you more about it. So these milestones and also this connection that we're highlighting between our past, our present, and our future also led in part to the selection of this year's conference theme, which is Bridging Connections, learning from the past and investing in the future. And some of our thinking around this theme is this idea that we inherit the systems and the legacies of the past for better or worse. We also refer to our past conditions and reference points as we look to the future that we want to see. And we must continue to make investments in the future to build resiliency while recognizing what we can and can't control. We've asked our presenters to keep these ideas in mind as they shape their talks, and we encourage you to look for them as you listen and discuss later over lunch or happy hour beers. So this conference is fortunate to have incredible interest from a diverse group of presenters that are eager to share their work and lessons learned, and their expertise ranges from stream function and channel design to endangered species, stormwater management, forest health, irrigation and land management, water rights transactions, and stakeholder engagement. And we're just so thankful for all of the expertise, lessons from the field, et cetera, that they're bringing to the presentations over the next few days. And we benefit from the support of our sponsors, without whom this conference would not be possible. So it wouldn't be financially feasible to offer the conference at the rate that we do. Their support also makes it possible for us to offer approximately 20 scholarships to students, young professionals, and other folks who are new to the conference. And we really encourage everyone to look for those folks who might be wandering and not connecting up with groups and really make them welcome. Try to use those social and networking skills to bring them into your groups, welcome them, introduce them to your groups, and help them get connected. I do want to give some specific shout outs to our top sponsors. Our sustaining level benefactor sponsors include the Colorado Water Conservation Board and the Pitkin County Healthy Rivers Fund, as well as the Walton Family Foundation. Our Headwaters level presenting sponsors include the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment Non-Point Source Program and also Northern Water. And our river level sponsors include the City of Golden, Coalitions and Collaboratives, also known as COCO, CSU Colorado Water Center, Denver Water, Icon Engineering, Iron Woman, Larimer County Conservation District, the Roaring Fork Conservancy, and the Source Water Assessment and Protection Program of CDPHE. For a full listing of sponsors, including our stream and scholarship level sponsors, please see the guidebook app or our rotating media screens throughout the conference that will play during breaks and other conference signage. We're really grateful to all of our sponsors for their support. Let's give them a round of applause. And also, I want to make note that many of our sponsors have exhibitor tables set up, so please take advantage of the breaks and the end of the day to make sure to stop by and learn about their programs and what they're all about. So in just a minute, we're going to play a few videos that give our biggest sponsors an opportunity to share more about their work, their purpose and mission, and their programs. But first, I'd like to invite our conference host committee to be recognized. This is a team of people who've been working essentially since last year's conference ended to prepare for this year. And so please join me in thanking from the Colorado Watershed Assembly, Casey Davenhill and Diane Keelty, as well as Brianna Federico. And from the Colorado Riparian Association, Julie Ash, Parker Sherman, Andrea Harbin-Monahan, and Sarah Hinshaw. And finally, joining me from Water Education Colorado, Susie Hiskey and Kendra Longworth. And lastly, running our AV crew from Spectrum, we have Adrian Romero and his colleague Joe, and another team member. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome to work with. So they are going to queue up our sponsor videos, and we're going to start with one from the Walton Family Foundation.
In Colorado, we are used to drought and dry seasons. But in the last 20 years, our state has seen more long-term effects, including less snowfall and reduced water in our reservoirs, lakes, and streams. This phenomena is called aridification, meaning our region's landscapes have become permanently drier and will have lasting impacts to our state's water users, especially in our farming and ranching communities. The Colorado Department of Natural Resources also works closely with the state's Department of Agriculture to understand the needs of our farmers, ranchers, and other community members as they continue to experience impacts of climate change, including aridification. In 2021, the Colorado Water Conservation Board partnered with the Colorado River Water Conservation District to release emergency water from Elk Head Reservoir in order to provide relief to Yampa Valley farmers following a dry growing season. The Yampa also feeds one of the most popular recreational areas in the state, enjoyed by many Coloradans and visitors to the state each year. The Yampa River Basin is one of the 8 major river basins in Colorado. In addition to being the lifeblood of its local agriculture economy, the river is home to abundant fish and wildlife. State water leaders strive to find the balance between water needs and uses, from agriculture to environmental health, to recreation, to household needs. We will continue seeking creative solutions to our water challenges by working together on the ground with local communities. Colorado Water Plan grant projects help maintain strong infrastructure, healthy river flows, and access for outdoor recreation on rivers and lakes. Local stakeholders ultimately advance the larger vision of the water plan as they move projects from planning to implementation, supporting the critically needed solutions that help keep Colorado strong. Learn more at cwcb.colorado.gov.
All right, and this is the last video that we're going to play before we kick off our first plenary session, and we're going to save a final one for this evening's banquet dinner, and this one comes from Northern Water.
Northern Water was created to supply water to municipalities and agricultural users throughout northeastern Colorado. But we as an organization understand at a deep level that managing water resources goes hand in hand with striving to be good stewards of our natural environment. We can't take on these large-scale projects on our own, and we're very grateful that we have had the opportunity to develop these relationships and partnerships with many of our other entities that work with us and engage to achieve our healthy watershed goals. There's a new initiative that we have engaged in. It is focused on the Kawanichi Valley. It's where the Colorado River flows from Rocky Mountain National Park into Shadow Mountain Reservoir. There's been a loss of equilibrium between the local wildlife and the geomorphic processes that take place symbiotically.
So we're hoping to use things like simulated beaver structures, exclosure fencing, planting riparian vegetation. We recently completed aerial mulching operations in highly burned areas of the East Troublesome Fire.
We were able to collectively over these past 2 years treat about 12,500 acres.
And then we're also going to be looking at 16 miles of streams that we have identified for what's called low-tech process-based treatments.
We are looking at a project that will connect the Colorado River again, and it'll bring it around the reservoir. The goal of the project is to increase fish passage.
Altogether, there are numerous projects that are going to be related to Colorado River stream flow, closely related to connectivity channel, and the Learning by Doing group is going to oversee those projects and to make sure they all fit together and work well together when they're all completed.
As part of our involvement with the Grand County Learning by Doing organization, Northern Water has started a project to develop conceptual designs for restoration in Willow Creek below Willow Creek Reservoir in Grand County.
NISP is a critical component of the future of this region. It is important in the context of the growth that this region is seeing, but also in terms of all the mitigation and the environmental commitments and enhancements that will come with this project.
For the past several years, Northern Water has had a very robust forest health program. We accomplished this mission primarily through cooperation with stakeholders. We utilized the Colorado State Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, and many other local and regional partners.
As we better understand the cascading effects from high mountains to faucets, it is critically important that we work in partnership with these agencies and others as well to tackle these issues at a landscape scale and in a strategic manner.
So thank you again to those sponsors, and again, you'll get to see a video from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment's non-point source program this evening as part of our evening event. And we don't have anything from Pitkin County Healthy Rivers Fund, one of our other top sponsors, but I know Lisa Tasker and Lisa McDonald, two of their staff, are here joining us, and they're an awesome organization that if you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to get to know it. It's a really great model, and they do incredible work, and I really applaud them for recognizing the value of investing not only in their own watershed, but also in this statewide event. Thank you so much. So before I invite our first plenary session presenters up, and you're almost done with me, I just want to share a few more things about the experience that we're hoping to create for you all here over the next 2.5 days. So after a couple of years of having the conference kind of fully or partially hijacked by COVID and not having as many kind of elbows in the room, we are thrilled to have a packed house. We have record high attendance, and we should have plenty of seats for everyone, but it may be shoulder to shoulder at times, so we really encourage everyone to watch for folks who are looking for a seat and make room. Scoot in toward the center, sit up front, make it easier for those folks who are coming in a little bit later to get in. For tomorrow's concurrent tracks, it's hard for us to predict exactly how people are going to disperse among the 3 rooms. So there again, some sessions may be fuller than others, and we just ask that you'd bear with us. But it could be standing room only, depending on how popular a session is. So again, try to take a seat toward the front or the middle of rows and make it easier for people to get in. And then for tonight, we also expect a packed house at our banquet dinner, and we're only able to accommodate people who have a fully paid registration. So you should have received as part of your conference badge a white ticket that will get you into the dinner, and then your red tickets are for beers and drinks at the happy hour. And then tomorrow, you'll have an opportunity to earn more tickets for tomorrow's happy hour for free beer by visiting our poster social presenters. So as a team, we are incredibly proud to be able to offer this opportunity again to learn from each other's experiences in the field and to build this stronger peer network that can advance the work of sustaining Colorado watersheds collectively. So we hope you enjoy the conference. And now we're going to kick it off. I'd like to invite our first plenary session presenters to the stage. When we first heard about this topic, we thought this was a really valuable thing at this moment in time to focus on with the full group of attendees present together. So we're really excited to have this be one of our plenary sessions. It's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law at Year 1, a once-in-a-generation investment in water infrastructure and climate resilience. And this is going to be moderated by Alex Funk from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. And his panelists include Anna Mauss, who's a registered professional engineer in Colorado and works for the Colorado Water Conservation Board as the chief operating officer. Also, Karen Kwon, the assistant program director for the Colorado River Sustainability Campaign. Amy Moyer, the director of strategic partnerships for the Colorado River District. And Nate Pearson, the recovery officer at the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. So we're going to bring them up now.
Testing. Alex Funk, Director of Water Resources, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Thanks for having us, and thanks, Jayla and the organizers for inviting us to be part of this plenary panel. Pretty excited about this. I have to say, I've been with TRCP now for just a little over a year and have been sort of steeped, I think, from day one in this federal funding opportunity that we have ahead of us in terms of water conservation and restoration work in terms of federal funding. So, funding has historically been a huge bottleneck, for increasing the pace and scale of watershed restoration projects. And between the three sort of buckets of federal funding that we're going to kind of talk about and dive into more today, we'll, kind of understand like that while that barrier is maybe not as prominent, there's certainly other challenges. So we'll kind of dig into that a little bit more and learn about what Colorado and the River District and other folks are doing to help, us navigate these resources. So with that, go ahead and get started. And I have to say, when we submitted this proposal, gosh, back in May or April, obviously the focus was not on the bipartisan infrastructure law. We now have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is this other huge bucket of funding that kind of materialized back in July and has only been around for a couple months. And so, we're slight amendment to the title here. We're about almost a year into the bipartisan infrastructure law, but only about 2 months into this other sort of giant influx of funding, which we'll kind of touch on as well. So I'll provide some quick window dressing, and then I'll turn it over to our panel. So we're going to be touching on sort of 3 large buckets of federal funding, plus a little bit what the state of Colorado has done to make the state more competitive for these funds. And so kind of just like, kind of basic timeline in terms of where we're at. Going back to March 2021, we see the first of these packages pass. This is the American Rescue Plan Act, through which there's some stimulus funding available for states, counties, and tribes to essentially help with recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. That includes water infrastructure and restoration and conservation projects. We'll talk more about that in a second. Fast forward to November of last year, we see the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It was also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, or BIF, at first, which I thought was kind of fun. But it's IJA, or bill, however you want to kind of describe it. At the same time, there was this sort of like companion bill called Build Back Better, which is going to be this like another massive influx of funding. They're essentially designed to be sort of companion bills. In short, Congress passes IJA, does not pass Build Back Better. It kind of stalls in the Senate. We move to Colorado legislative session. A series of bills passes that helps sort of Colorado become more competitive for these funds. We'll talk a little bit more about those here in a second. And then finally in August, we sort of get Build Back Better shrunk, now called the Inflation Reduction Act. And so collectively, this is sort of the landscape in which we've been and sort of tracking these resources as these, and we're kind of like very much in the implementation phase with all these buckets. Just some quick comparisons between the two. I won't spend a ton of time here since others will touch on this, but just kind of, here's our 3 pieces of legislation that we're talking about this afternoon. The American Rescue Plan Act, again, largely funneled through public entities and tribes. They are, sort of set up to administer and allocate those funds towards, certain projects and programs. We'll kind of talk about how Colorado approached that. On the infrastructure law, some of the headlines that kind of came out after that passed were $8.3 billion for Western water infrastructure. There's $50 billion for climate resilience and ecosystem restoration tucked away for Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service. A lot of those funds, especially through the infrastructure law, are delivered through existing programs, and a healthy portion of them are competitive in nature. And I have to say, if you take anything away, the infrastructure law is very focused on shovel-ready projects. I mean, that's sort of the key phrase with that package has been like, we want projects that are ready to go and kind of teed up. So what's not included in that? Capacity building, project planning, all those essential ingredients that go into developing those larger projects. Enter the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, billions of dollars for ecosystem restoration and drought mitigation in the West. Largely delivered through, Department of Interior and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Some of the highlights that, some of the folks that will on the panel be talking about are certainly the $4 billion for drought mitigation through the Bureau of Reclamation, the $20 billion in private land conservation and restoration through USDA. So we're talking about some pretty big numbers here. Opportunities with IRA, potentially funded through existing programs, but much more broad in scale in terms of what potentially it could fund. So maybe it could fund that capacity development, which we know is a huge bottleneck. And a lot of the things with IRA are available with no match or with waivers, which is pretty exciting. So again, some of these funds can start hitting the ground sooner than later. But there are barriers, right? And so one thing that TRCP and others have been doing for the past year is kind of getting a better understanding of, for smaller watershed groups in particular, or forest collaboratives, what are the historical and existing universal barriers to accessing these federal funds? And we'll kind of wade into those, but I wanted to point out that we've done some surveys and sort of intergroup, interview sessions and stakeholder sessions over the past year. The big ones are federal agency capacity. It's just tough to get this money out the door quickly with not a lot of staff. Organizational capacity. It takes time to write grants, to find projects, to do that stakeholding work. A lot of that is not eligible for funding under this, so that remains a huge barrier. Permitting can be a huge barrier in terms of like both cost and ability to get that timing down. Finding match, which we'll kind of talk about, which hopefully Colorado has helped us with quite a bit. And then navigating this. So the IIJA alone has about 400 different federal programs embedded in one piece of legislation that are getting funding. So, if you're just one organization trying to piece these things together, that's a real challenge. There's been some guidebooks and other sort of information put out there. Talk a little bit about this great tracker that the state has put together. But all in all, these are not necessarily resolved barriers, but things that now that we have these, huge buckets of funding, people are starting to think about them. And so, something that we'll kind of dive into a little bit with the panel here. Because I have to say, Colorado's done a just fantastic job about kind of getting ahead of this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kwon. He's going to talk a little bit about what the infrastructure law and the IRA mean for the Colorado River Basin specifically.
Is this working? Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Kwon. Thanks, Alex, for setting this up so well. I hope it's okay. I'm just going to be a little bit informal here and chat about what the IIJA or bill and the IRA, I like their names are Ira and Bill. That's kind of nice. Mean to the Colorado River. And the reason I'm focusing on the Colorado River is that's where some of the focus has been, especially with IRA, but kind of where a lot of the needs seem to be highlighting at the moment. And the Colorado River, I think everybody here knows, kind of has an influence on the rest of the state. So with that, I would say, what does the IRA and bill mean to the Colorado River? I think they both mean hope. I think they provide enough funding for us to be able to actually attack the crisis at hand and not just endure a drought that doesn't seem to be going away, but help develop the mechanisms, both innovative and adaptive mechanisms for preparing for the future. But I would say that it's not a solution in and of itself. It's incumbent upon all of us, and as Alex pointed out, all of us, including the federal government and everybody, to figure out the complexities of this and how to land the money and apply it in a useful way so that we can actually achieve the goals as opposed to watch it get dwindled away. As I say, we all know that the Colorado River is in crisis, and just as an example, is that Glen Canyon Dam in 1980 was full, and as of last year, it is 170 feet below full and lost 70 feet in 1 year, and is in very real possibilities of going below power pool and hitting dead pool. Lake Mead's no different. That picture shows that in 2002, which was the driest year on historical record, that the water line was way above where it is right now, and they too are hurting. And there's been a lot of interim discussions and conversations about what to do about this, and people have been working and taking concessions, but those concessions have been focused on enduring the drought until we can get out of it. And we're realizing this is not, as even Director Gibbs had indicated, it's an aridification more than it is just a short time period that we need to get through. And so it's not enough. We need to do big stuff, and we need to do big stuff fast. And it's not limited to the lower basin issues. It's even if we all wanted to forget about the big reservoirs, there, as Director Gibbs noted, there's tributaries drying up, there's soils drying up, ranches and farms are hurting, people are uncertain about their water supplies in this state. And so there's things we need to do, and that's where I think the IRA and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act come in. As Alex said, it's a once-in-a-generation investment in our infrastructure. It includes large investments in resilience of physical and natural systems. It provides not just authorization for activities, but the appropriation. We don't have to go through the whole appropriation process, which is thankful. It goes between now and 2026, and it includes traditional water infrastructure actions like the Western Water perspectives, as well as the drinking and clean water components, as well as climate resilience and wildfire protection and ecosystem restoration. It's not a guarantee of a solution, and it's not permanent money. It's going to go away in 2026. So it's not specific solely to the Colorado River, and it is a nationwide program that Alex identified as mostly through existing programs, and a lot of it is a competitive grant program. But these are kind of some of the types of projects that will be awarded money. And the Bureau of Reclamation, I think, has been the most, at least the one I've focused on the most, but they've been doing spend plans on an annual basis, identifying how much money they will put out each year, put out their notices of funding opportunities, then you apply for the grant, and then you get an award, or you don't. And the shovel-ready projects are the ones that are getting the awards quicker, and it's taking a lot longer to get the big projects planned, designed, and ready to go so that we can apply for these grants. And so basically, it is a little bit slower than we had hoped. And again, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be solely for Colorado or the Colorado River Basin. So, but there are some great opportunities for tribes, as well as some national applications and other things other than just water supply. There's clean water, access to water, there's forest and aquatic landscape components, and all of these provide funding at a greater scale if we can land the money in a useful way. And I would say as of September, Reclamation has reported that they've been able to distribute this year north of $1.2 billion of bipartisan infrastructure law money. That is not all in Colorado or in the Colorado River Basin. It is throughout the West, and it is not all for types of projects I think that we would be really supportive of, but they are part of the process. They're replacing aging infrastructure. They are enhancing ag irrigation efficiencies. They're doing dam safety. They're also doing the Water Smart programs through the Water Smart process. So there's water efficiencies, drought response, aquatic ecosystem restoration components. All of those are going, and they're reporting $1.2 billion. They're not breaking it down into location completely yet. That's the bill. That happened, as Alex said, back last year, and you'll recall that from December through the summer of this year, there was a lot that happened in the Colorado River Basin. Some included the fact that there was emergency actions taken to protect infrastructure and to change releases from the big, large reservoirs because of that. Then there was an announcement from the Commissioner of Reclamation that we need to come up with 2 to 4 million acre feet more than what we have been doing to protect the system each year between now and 2026, and that we need to do it soon. Well, those were in hearings before the Senate and also in House hearings, and there was a lot of people talking about all of this stuff. So that kind of, I think, rejiggered the whole concept of a Build Back Better, but now to include it in the Inflation Reduction Act. And thankfully, they were able to convince Senator Manchin to press that forward with a little bit of jockeying. It started to be talking about $5 billion for the Colorado River specifically, and what it would be for, and all these things, but it was going back and forth and how to negotiate that. And that was in addition to the other conservation title kind of programs. What IRA is a groundbreaking law providing critical funding for mega drought in the Colorado River Basin and similarly situated river systems. It isn't a guarantee of programming into perpetuity. This funding has to be doled out by 2026, but can be spent through 2031. And it includes things such as money for tribal water and resilience, specifically for climate resilience and adaptation. It also includes money for specifically the Colorado River Basin and similarly situated basins experiencing similar drought. It's $4 billion for these three things: compensation for temporary or multi-year reduction, voluntary system conservation projects, or environmental benefit projects, and ecosystem and habitat restoration. And it's run through reclamation, the $4 billion is. It's available to public entities and tribes, and its funds may be made available through grants, contracts, or other agreements. This is not necessarily through existing programs, and we'll find that out, how that's kind of coming about here in just a second. And the funds are available through 2026 and spent through 2031. There's also, as Alex said, $20 billion for climate smart ag. This is specific to how you are going to help the climate change conditions in the area. So this isn't necessarily another shot at just drought response, but if you can focus on the climate, if you can focus your projects and ag projects specifically under the EQIP program and the RCPP program or the ag conservation easement programs that show a climate benefit, then you're going to be able to get some of this money. And it's also $1 billion for conservation technical assistance related to climate as well. So I just would like to highlight one last thing with the IRA is that Reclamation has since identified that they're going to try to get some of this money out in a new way, and it's still being pieced together, but it'll be in 3 different buckets, on 2 short-term and 1 long-term, and we can get into that in a little bit more detail later, but hopefully we can find the collaboration to work together and have the chance to collaborate and innovate on these things going forward.
Thanks, Karen. Well, just one question, I guess. Great job, Karen. Or just one quick question. So yeah, $4 billion seems like a lot of money. I know a lot of folks in the basin and other watersheds are kind of looking at this as a real opportunity to fix, not just the crashing system on the Colorado, but maybe other western watersheds like the Klamath and the Rio as well. Can you kind of like maybe walk through what details Reclamation has provided to date in terms of maybe how they're thinking about, this funding and sort of any initial reactions to that, and overall just your general opinion in terms of, in terms of actually fixing some of these issues that you're highlighting, how best potentially could IRA be invested to address that?
Thanks. So yes, there is, the way the wording in the IRA is stated is that it's for the Colorado River Basin or other basins with experiencing similar drought. So it leaves it open. So everybody else, the Rio's like, hi, we are experiencing similar drought. Klamath is like, hi, we are experiencing similar drought. So that's still trying to be worked out. I think the way that we've been looking at it is that not all the money is going to the Colorado River Basin, but a significant portion of it would. And then, so that's the first component. It hasn't been definitively said that way, but that's logical. I don't think Reclamation is going to be able to say, never mind. So then we also have how much goes where. And there's a lot of debate about this, but I guess the best way to handle it and avoid arguments and stirring the pot would be to make sure that there is some shared in both the upper basin and the lower basin. It all doesn't go to one water use sector, and all doesn't go to one basin, because that then just creates problems and disputes and debates about how the money was spent. If you've noticed in the news and stuff, there's a little bit of distrust in the basin too. People are not really agreeing with each other and pointing fingers, so transparency, I think, is going to be essential. We need to know how this money is going to go, not because of a backroom deal that a senator cut for this bill, but because we know the process is real. I think also timing. With the states and other public entities, they need to coordinate to get the funds out to where they need to go quickly and effectively. If this is sat on, then we're losing our opportunity, both for short-term and long-term. And then that leads me to a very key component, I think, for the benefit of the Inflation Reduction Act. This all needs to be going to build resilience in the basin. If we are doing this on a one-year annual, year-by-year thing of just paying people not to use their water, we have solved no problems with how we're going to adapt in the future. So we need to dedicate this money to useful programs that will build resilience. That to me means probably multi-benefit programs in a lot of ways, because then you have more benefits coming and that they can bring along the river in a short period of time. And I think that also we need to figure out how the invest in what you had brought up, Alex, of how to address the barriers to adopting the resilience strategies, whether it be the siloing and just the complexity of all the different programs that are out there, or in coordinating on that, or the fact that there's not a lot of capacity or organizational capacity to do a lot of these things. The more we can invest in those kind of things with this money, the better.
That is a great segue to our representatives from the state of Colorado. So we have Nate Pearson and Anna Mauss. Nate is with Department of Natural Resources and has been in the weeds on IIJA and all this federal funding, I think since when I roughly started. And then Anna is the Chief Operating Officer at the Water Conservation Board and has really been tasked with rolling out some of these new programs that came online this past session. And TRCP, we're kind of working on some of these funding allocation strategies across the river, across the Rio, across the Colorado River Basin. And I have to say, Colorado has set itself up very nicely to be very competitive for these funds, especially when compared to other states that don't necessarily have, a lot of state match or other investment strategies. So with that, to learn a bit more about what's going on in Colorado, I'll turn it over to Nate and Anna.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Sounds like I'm working here. So yeah, Nate Pearson, Recovery Officer at the Department of Natural Resources. And I'm part of a team that's actually spread across sort of a number of state agencies, all working on different sectors of economic recovery. And so obviously my focus is on natural resources programs, and there's a lot of action. At the state level, we've had a lot of investment in natural resources, including water programs, and obviously at the federal level. And so we've got a lot to talk about. So obviously, IIJA passed in November of last year, and I think there was a collective deep breath as everyone tried to figure out what was in it. How do we seize on this? And so I think the approach that we've been trying to take at the department, especially given that the majority of these competitive funds that Karen walked through are not going to flow through the state. They're going to flow directly from the federal government to local governments, nonprofits, watershed groups, water districts. And so we had to give a lot of thought to how we at the state, given that we won't touch the money, support all of these entities in seizing on these funds. And so I think the general approach that we've adopted is sort of three-pronged. The first being education and information sharing. So just getting out, talking to people about what's in the bill, making sure that folks around the state understand what is out there and can start conceptualizing how their project ideas fit into this wide span of funding opportunities. The second strategy is offering technical support. And so, as Alex mentioned, there's a lot of work that goes into building a successful federal funding application. And so, Anna will talk about this in a bit, but we went to the Colorado General Assembly last year and advocated for funding to offer direct technical assistance to folks around the state who are applying for federal funding opportunities in the water space. And then the third strategy is assisting local governments with the matching funds requirements of these funds. And we'll talk about this in a bit, but another bill that passed last legislative session helps fill that gap, at least in the short term. And so I'll start here with education. So since November of last year when the bill passed, I've been out across the state doing webinars, conferences, talking to as many folks as I can just about what's in the bill. And as I said, it's really, I think, helpful to get folks understanding what's in the bill and start conceptualizing how their projects match that. And I think I've seen over the last 11 months, understanding across our state really grow. The questions have stopped being about what's out there and started to more so be about, all right, how do we actually make this happen, which is encouraging. And so one of the sort of ongoing educational tools or information sharing tools is linked here. And I don't know if the slides will be shared, but this link is also on the CWCB website. But this is a spreadsheet that is pulling from the federal grants portal, grants.gov. Every month is pulling all of the active federal water funding opportunities. And so it's showing you, giving you links to the program materials, contact information, description of the types of projects that are applicable, eligibility information for recipients, how much money is available, whether there's a matching component. And so that's showing what is available today. There's also a tab in that sheet that shows state funding opportunities across state agencies from DNR to CDPHE, Department of Local Affairs. And so we hope that it's a helpful resource to start getting your arms around what is currently active out there. As Karen walked through those huge numbers, billions for this, hundreds of millions for that, the federal agencies are largely rolling that out over 5 years, 10 years. And so it's not that it's all just available right at once. Most of them are sequencing it over a number of years. And so it can be a lot of work to track, how all that is moving and what's available at any given time. And so please make use of this resource as you're navigating that. I'll pass it to Anna now to talk about technical assistance as well as watershed restoration. Sorry.
Is this on? Yes. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Nate, and appreciate that tracker. I think that is a huge resource to, I think, everyone statewide. I've had a lot of really positive feedback on that. So through a bill that went through the session last year, money is flowing through the CWCB. It's actually American Recovery Plan Act, so different federal dollars flowing through the CWCB to really help with some capacity building and some other restoration work that is sort of important to the Department of Natural Resources. So I'll touch first on the capacity side of things. We've got $5 million set aside. Oh, thanks, Nate. Jumping ahead of the slide. Sorry, I'm out of order. So we've got $5 million set aside really to help entities apply for those federal dollars, since there are so many dollars out there, and everyone has acknowledged the fact that applying for those federal funds can be a significant lift. There's a lot of capacity issues on a multitude of levels really for this. So we have 2 different programs to try to help address this. The first one is what we're calling our local capacity grants. Those are grants that are issued directly to entities that have a project identified. They likely know what that federal opportunity is, may or may not, but likely know where they're gonna apply for a federal grant and know what steps to take to get there, but they just need some help getting that done. So they might need to hire an engineer to work on further planning, some pre-permitting work, looking at funding opportunities as far as other opportunity to really finance a package, grant writing opportunities. So those are direct grants to entities to help them navigate that system. And then we have a sort of sister program to that is not yet released. We're actually in the process of rolling this out, but we are going to hire contractors so that we have that resource. So we're calling that side of it the CWCB Technical Assistance Grants. And so that will be a resource by which if an entity has an idea for a project, knows they want to move it forward, but they don't even know where to start. They don't know how to maybe hire an engineer or a grant writer or where to start that permitting process, and maybe not even know what federal opportunity to look to. So we will be hiring a team of contractors that will be a resource that entities can apply to. It'll be a similar sort of grant application process that we're still gonna ask a few questions to say, what's your project idea? What do you anticipate for the outcomes? And then that way we can put you with the right resources on the team that we're selecting. So both of these programs do have matching requirements of a 25%, half of which can be in kind. A couple nuances with the American Recovery Plan Act funds is that we have to obligate, execute contracts by the end of December 2024 and spend all of those dollars by December 2026. So there is a little bit of a timing thing here that we need to move these somewhat rapidly, but I think the benefit of that is then we get in line faster for all these other federal programs. So there's an opportunity there for sure. With both of those programs, they are rolling application deadlines, meaning that as you're ready, give us a call. Let's have a conversation to make sure we generally think it fits. Go ahead and fill out an application, and we'll just kind of administer those somewhat as they come in. It's still competitive. There's a number of things that we'll be scoring things on, but that's largely what we're trying to do, and really with the goal of advancing things that are identified as priorities in Colorado's water plan. So, and then that's largely because that's part of our mission, but also there are other opportunities for funding. State revolving fund, for instance, got a lot of money for water infrastructure, water treatment, wastewater treatment. So we're trying to narrow our focus on what's in alignment with the CWCB's mission. So that's on that side of things. And if you want to back up one, Nate, do you want to talk about the wildfire?
I'm
Yep.
happy to let you, but
Okay,
I
yep.
just, before moving off the slide, I wanted to thank the Colorado River District for the helpful graphic that just lays out all of the steps that it takes from concept to, funding and construction. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other part of that bill that I'll talk about is the watershed restoration. And I know Chris Sturm is back here, and he'll probably be speaking with you all. Chris, are you speaking about your wildfire-ready watersheds later? Okay. Perfect. So that's a little preview. Come listen to Chris. So we have $10 million set aside for a special release of the Colorado Watershed Restoration Grant Program, and with the intent of really advancing the work that Chris is going through with this wildfire-ready watersheds to look at the plans and then further implementation. Funds have been approved, but the program is not rolled out. That's yet to come in a couple months. So between Chris and our communications staff, we'll be certain to get information out on that program once it becomes available. And I don't probably want to answer anything technical on that because Chris is the guy. So if you've got questions on that program, I would encourage you to make sure to connect with him at this conference.
And then not directly related, obviously, to maximizing infrastructure bill funds, although there is some crossover, but to round out House Bill 1379, there's funding for both the Department of Natural Resources and the Colorado State Forest Service to conduct wildfire mitigation projects that have a watershed focus. And so just wanted to touch on that briefly because it is contained in the bill. And then the final, or the third of the three strategies that I laid out is supporting matching funds. And so Senate Bill 22-215, this past legislative session, set aside $80 million in the governor's office to help both state agencies and local governments meet the matching requirements of federal grants. And the bill is explicitly passed with the goal of facilitating infrastructure bill funding requests and make sure that Colorado can be as competitive as possible. And so the governor's office is managing that program. They've launched it, and they're accepting applications. The details can be found on the governor's website. They, obviously, you can see here, there's a list of the types of projects that they're looking for. Water, environmental, and resiliency projects are just one of those. And so this $80 million is really meant to cover a really broad swath of projects across the state, and I think we're all watching closely to see how quickly it moves, and we may cover that a little bit more soon here. And then this slide just details that there are some federal resources. So Anna talked a lot about our state technical assistance program. There's also a pretty wide range of federal technical assistance programs, which are linked here in this slide. The White House, I think, recognizing this big issue, released earlier this year a pretty large guide to all of these resources. Not all of them are related to water environmental projects. Some of them are sort of passive assistance, webinars or guides on how to navigate federal grant processes, but some of them are sort of real on the ground assistance in navigating all of this. And then finally, there are spend plans from all of these federal agencies that you can look at to try to understand what's coming down the pipeline. So that link that I shared earlier of pulling from active federal grant applications is, again, showing only what's active, but it can be helpful to try to get ahead of the curve. So understand, the Bureau has said that in late fall of 2023, they will be releasing this multi-benefit watershed health grant. And so let's do some work to prepare in advance before the application's actually launched. With that, I think we can move to some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. Thanks, Anna. I also promised them not to throw them any hard balls, but I don't know if this is a hard ball more so than, both of you have been obviously pretty, in tune with tracking, the developments on the federal side in terms of how these funds have been rolled out. Can you kind of just maybe kind of touch on, some highlights that have been successful through that process, or maybe kind of point to where you've kind of seen some success there, or maybe kind of just highlight any sort of frustrations or sort of barriers you kind of still see in terms of the rollout of some of these federal resources?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. So I think some federal agencies, and I'm not going to name names because I know I have a lot of federal partners in here, some have been really, really great in providing detailed spend plans, webinars, and giving the public a really good understanding of how they will be implementing these funds over the course of 5-10 years. There are other agencies or even specific programs within agencies that have largely been communicating well, but there are sometimes specific programs or agencies where that information sharing hasn't been quite as strong, and it's been much harder to get an understanding of when funds will be coming, to which purposes, and how we as a state and as, you know, advocacy groups in Colorado can, you know, influence those decisions. And so I think that instances where, you know, an announcement comes out and the first time we hear about it is in a press release and they've made big decisions that impact our state, you know, that can be frustrating. But I would say that for the most part, there's been a really strong effort to take this huge historic generational investment and make it digestible for us as state agencies and you know groups working on this in Colorado. It hasn't been perfect, and you know, but it's hard to spend a ton of money really well. So I try to have grace when I have those moments of frustration, but there certainly have been some.
Anna, anything else to add there?
No, I don't. I guess I would just add that I think that, I mean, sort of the flip side of that coin is I think there's also so many positive things happening with traction getting going on projects and people getting energized thinking this is a thing I've been wanting to do for a long time and there might be a real opportunity now. So I think there's a flip side of that coin too, for sure.
Yeah, totally echo that, and thanks for saying that. It's so fun to see, you know, the light click on in someone's head. And we've been thinking about this for 10 years and we might actually have a chance at getting the money for it now. So that's really cool to see and really exciting.
Yeah, agree, especially like the scale potential opportunities here. I mean, there's enough funding here to do, you know, quite a bit in terms of like some transformative larger scale projects. And so with that, want to turn it over to Amy Moyer, Director of Strategic Partnerships with the River District, kind of zero in a little bit in terms of, you know, sort of how a regional government is sort of approaching this sort of historic, you know, funding opportunity, and kind of talk a little bit about, you know, how the River District setting itself up to sort of, you know, not only leverage these federal resources, but some of these other state, you know, buckets of funding as well to support projects in the River District region. So, Amy, thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Again, Amy Moyer with the Colorado River District, and I'm going to give a quick overview of our funding program, which we call our Community Funding Partnership, that launched in 2021, and then pivot pretty quickly to talk about how at the River District we've been using a local funding source to act as a catalyst for securing federal and state funding. So again, our Community Funding Partnership, we have $4.2 million annually that we dedicate to this program across the West Slope. And just a quick history for those that aren't familiar with the River District and our program started at the ballot box in November of 2020 with a ballot initiative that passed with a pretty incredible margin of 72%. So many of you in this room were part of that campaign. If anyone's worked on a campaign related to a funding question, receiving a support of 72% across, again, if you're not familiar with the Colorado River District, we represent 15 counties on Colorado's western slope that are incredibly diverse politically, with diverse economies, diverse geographies, from Pitkin County to Ouray County, from Moffett County to Summit County, again with a resounding bipartisan support that said 2 years ago that we were willing to tax ourselves to create a funding pool to make our communities more resilient. And so the core tenets of our program, again, we're a local funding source available to projects within our 15 county region. These are small to large projects. We've made awards as small as $4,500 and as large as $1 million awards. Our projects focus on locally driven, community-based projects and are focused on collaboration. So at this point, we have to look at projects with multiple objectives. We have to see projects that are multi-purpose. And most importantly, and what I'm going to talk more about, is how do we use a local funding source differently? How do we act as a catalyst? So we're leveraging our dollars, which in the grand scheme of things, $4.2 million, when we're talking about billions of dollars, we're a small game in town, but we can be really creative to figure out how do we leverage those dollars as much as possible. So we've set up our program with 5 project categories: productive agriculture, conservation and efficiency, healthy rivers, watershed health and water quality, and infrastructure. And over the first 2 years of the program, we've awarded $5.6 million to 60 projects across our district. Again, the most important figure here is that we're leveraging over $45 million for West Slope water projects. And we're moving into a storytelling opportunity of where some of our projects are finishing, and we can move from telling people about our funding program to really talking about the projects that are implemented. And so this project, I see Cheryl with the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District right in front of me, but they were a huge partner in this project where we brought together multiple producers. We had Trout Unlimited as a partner. The River District supported this project financially, where we have combined two irrigation diversions that really didn't make sense to sit together parallel, have to put in a push-up dam in the middle of the river. We were able to work together to widen the river, combine those two irrigation structures into one, and also include a return flow structure. So for the first time, there's an opportunity for fish to get back to the river. So we'll be moving forward in the next year to really showcase a lot of our projects, and this project in particular will be one of our first videos that we're calling our Community Funding Partnership Voices, CFP Voices, and so you saw some great videos today, so we're looking forward to share that with you all. But what I want to pivot to is to talk about our Accelerator grant opportunity. This was a core strategy in the River District's effort to capture bipartisan infrastructure law funding. And just to back up to talk about how we really changed our focus in 2022 after the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed, is that we pulled together a cross-discipline team amongst our 22 staff at the Colorado River District. But the important piece here is that we knew it wasn't just how do we leverage our own funding to capture these dollars, it was how do we work with our communications team so that our water users know more about all these opportunities. How do we use our government affairs team so that we can talk with our federal partners at the regional and DC offices to explain, here are some of the projects that we are supportive and want to see funded through these efforts, or here are some strategies of how you can make these funding opportunities more applicable to the West Slope. And then we pulled together folks from our technical team that are available to our water users to help shape these projects, understand what these federal programs are looking for. And then again, we have the funding realm of how do we use our dollars at the local level as strategically as possible so that we leverage the larger dollars that are on the table. And so we had 3 focus areas over the last year, the first being partner communication, working closely with a lot of people up on this panel of how do we know what the state is looking to do? What are other local funds doing? What are the opening dates for these federal programs? So really staying in communication with all of our partners in both the funding realm and project development realm, understanding our local priorities, so talking with our water users of what are your priorities for projects that you can implement. And like we've talked about on the panel, these large investments at the federal level are allowing the social license to think big. Let's think about our whole systems. Let's not think about this one segment of a ditch. Let's think about how do we become more resilient as a whole? How do we look at projects that have been unattainable because of a high financial cost? How do we really sit down and look systematic at what we can do? And then the third prong is continuing the funding, technical, and advocacy support that we work towards every day at the Colorado River District. And so you saw this graphic, and we created this just to better understand and better articulate that there are a lot of steps to get a project from concept and an idea to construction. And the federal funding streams really only come in at certain steps in this pipeline. And so as we were looking at this, we really narrowed in on what we're hearing from our federal partners is, and like Karen mentioned, shovel-ready projects are going to have the easiest path forward to get these dollars. We want to see 60% design. Ideally, we want to see 90% design. How do we get these projects to that state? There isn't a lot of funding opportunities that are stepping up to fund some of the technical work to make our projects competitive for these large-scale federal dollars. And so with that, what we're also seeing is, again, we're not just competing in Colorado for these dollars, we're competing against the entire Western United States, where there are other states and other entities that are prepared for these dollars. They have a pipeline of projects, and we're seeing these large-scale investments go to other projects across the West. And so with that, we launched our accelerator grant opportunity in mid-June to offer some of the technical support that the state is picking up with an additional investment to support grant writing, feasibility, design, that preliminary environmental review, maybe most importantly, a benefits analysis, because what these federal partners want to see is can you quantify the benefits to this project, and what are we getting for our investment, and then also the preliminary engineering. And so again, we offered that opportunity in early June with an application date of August 1st, and we also offered to fund a pretty high percentage of these costs, because again, our goal here is how do we use our local funding to set our projects up to get larger scale dollars at the federal level. And so September 15th, we wrapped up our first awards for this process. We awarded accelerator grant funding to 12 projects across our district, a little under $500,000 in funding for projects that are targeting a wide array of federal opportunities, from programs at the NRCS, the PL 566 watershed programs, the whole suite of water smart categories, including the Environmental Water Resources Benefit Program that will provide up to 75% of a cost share, the Salinity Control Program, and the EQIP program, with a wide array of project types. So we have watershed restoration projects, we have delivery system modernization, we have municipal redundancy projects, and SCADA and automation projects that our hope is that we can be good partners with these 12 projects, work with them through this process, and ideally in the 2023 and 2024 federal funding cycles, see these projects move faster and see them capture the federal dollars that we're hoping to see. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, really excited to see that accelerator program and the interest in it. I think it's a really great model for, not only the state, but also other regional governments that potentially are kind of looking at maximizing, some of these resources to the ground. Well, I know we're going to turn it over to audience questions here in a little bit, but I have a question, first for Amy, then kind of open it back up to the panel. So we're about a year in, give or take, into Bill and ARPA. We've got, IRA now on sort of the horizon. We know that federal partners are starting to put the pieces together for the Inflation Reduction Act. What would be some of the lessons learned from the past year on the infrastructure bill that you would potentially want to see incorporated into IRA to potentially maybe avoid some of the issues that we saw with the IIJA rollout, or ways for improvement, or opportunities you kind of see with this new glut of funding that could maybe maximize what we also have on the infrastructure side? Kind of a classic funk 5-part question there, but Amy, I'll kind of start with you, and feel free to kind of pick and choose.
I think as we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, it's kind of mind-blowing to think of $4 billion, and I think that's a really big barrier right now. As you see article after article of 30 million, 4 billion, 2.3 billion, and you hear all of this, and then you say, how do you access it? What do I need to do to get this money? And so it's a really hard time also to plan for projects. We are in uncertain times with supply chain issues. Costs of construction are going up. There aren't contractors to hire, and yet you have to figure out these opportunities to apply for federal funding that might open once a year, and then you'll contract 2 years later. And so I think the biggest barriers are being really transparent about what are the timelines and how do you prepare to access these federal funding opportunities. What are the spend plans for these? Because you have some federal agencies that are really clear that we're breaking this money up in 5-year segments, and this is what we're going to do, and some federal entities that are first come, first serve. Both models work, but it's really hard to track exactly how to prepare our projects for that. So I think just breaking down those barriers of and working with partners, because that's a lot of where the state can help, where we can help at the Colorado River District, our NGO partners, of really understanding when are those opportunities going to open, what are they looking for, and help play matchmaker for the projects that we know exist in Colorado.
Yeah, what I took from Amy's response, which I think is absolutely right, is just getting a better understanding from federal agencies, including the Bureau, of how they plan to move these funds. And I think until we have that better understanding, it's hard to do much more than I think the state has already done. I think our federal delegation, led by Senator Bennett, have already sent a letter to the Bureau of Reclamation sort of outlining priorities for Colorado in the context of the Upper Basin. But again, until we understand whether there will be a matching requirement, sort of how funds will flow over time, it's hard for us to strategize on the types of things that we were just discussing for the infrastructure bill.
Add to that as well is with IRA is that the funding of how it goes to address immediately the issues in the upper basin is different than how it will be used to go to address issues in the lower basin. There's 4 states in the upper basin through the Upper Colorado River Commission that want the money to flow through that to control the things versus just handing it out. And so we don't know what what it's going to be yet, but that's another element that we all need to, we're waiting with bated breath, including the NGO community who also has people under contract to try to help. You know, we're just all trying to help, but we're waiting to figure out how to help.
So with that, is it time for? We still have half an hour. Okay, yeah, I can tell I definitely planned ahead. Sorry, I have like a newborn. My brain is not functioning entirely, so what time is it? Well, good thing I have some other questions for us then. And feel free to kick me when we get a little bit closer. But so, okay, we talked about some of these universal barriers that, I think the state has taken some pretty proactive steps to addressing. We've, sort of talked about the match and the capacity challenges. Some of the other universal barriers that we sort of highlighted there, the permitting issues, the navigation, just the project pipeline concept in itself. In your all's, I guess, sort of, expert opinions, what remains sort of the still biggest barrier or hurdle remaining in terms of, Colorado maximizing its ability to, I guess, leverage or capture these funds?
So I'm happy to take that first. So I think we're obviously in the early stages of implementing some of these new programs that will help support implementation in Colorado. I think we'll obviously be tracking, how quickly, or, what is the demand for our technical assistance program? How quickly do those funds flow? Do we need to look at further, funding opportunities to keep that program going? The same goes for the matching funds. I think there's no estimate that I've seen for, statewide, funding amounts for the infrastructure bill that would, that would be met by just the $80 million that was set aside by the legislature next year. And so I think there's already conversations about, what's next in supporting our communities with matching funds. I think those are 2 big ones. I think another is, having organizations, governments, districts, nonprofits across the state step up and sponsor projects and be willing to take on, the burden of applying for and managing federal funds, knowing that you have support across the state. But we certainly won't seize on and, be competitive with this funding unless folks across the state really step up. And we hope that we're, continue to give folks the tools to do that. But I think that'll be really important.
One of the thoughts that I have that I think we're looking at is related to contingency funds of, I mentioned earlier, we see a lot of projects that get stuck in a constant fundraising cycle because you can get federal funds and you think your project is going to cost this much and you get the matching funds for that amount. And then great, your project's now $1.2 million when you had planned for $800,000. And so you're back to fundraising while project costs continue to escalate. And so how can we collectively work with our partners and think through when can we call it and say, okay, we're moving to construction and we have these contingency funds to get these projects done? I think that's a struggle that we're seeing probably more inflated over the last few years with some of the increased costs and contractor delays and those pieces.
If it's specifically to Colorado, but I think it could be applicable in Colorado as well, is that we've seen, especially for the funds that are going through existing programs, so for the one time a year kind of opportunities to apply for grants, they're more methodical and by just rote, you must follow it this way or you're out. without considering the implications of what they're denying or what an example would be a letter of support was a day late kind of thing, and it's rejected for a technicality versus, that kind of thing. So I think, I know transparency and we want to, but technicalities when we're talking about projects of scale that have benefits for so many things, I think are something that could be, with capacity at the federal level, might be helpful.
Well, a question, I guess, because I know we have quite a bit of, sort of like practitioners and sort of non-governmental partners in the audience. And a lot of the funds we're talking about here are really just eligible for public entities, right? So, a healthy chunk of the IRA, that $4 billion in IRA, for example, that's public entities and tribes. We had America the Beautiful this past summer, that flew largely through, public entities. This might be a question for, our public entity panelists, but can you kind of maybe walk through in terms of, if you're kind of navigating some of these bigger buckets of funding, but they're potentially being sort of shepherded through some of those public agencies, sort of your all's experience in terms of how you're kind of working with the NGO and kind of like, watershed restoration, sort of forest collaborative community in terms of, kind of compiling and putting some of those opportunities together?
I'll just start by saying I think our NGO community is really critical to managing these projects and filling some of those administrative capacity barriers of moving projects forward, of understanding here's the next step to get us prepared for permitting. Here are the next steps for building these project coalitions. And some of the pieces that we hear all the time from our federal partners is, projects are more competitive if they're tied to a regional plan or they're tied to a stream management plan. They're more competitive if you have a coalition and multiple partners, and our NGOs are really critical in filling those gaps and building those coalitions that provide that tipping point for these projects to be successful.
Yeah, I agreed with everything Amy just said. Just such a critical added layer of capacity, expertise, connection with local communities and the types of projects they're pursuing. And I feel like it's rare that you see a big project launching, especially in the watershed space, that doesn't involve a combination of NGOs and government organizations. And one of the programs that you saw referenced in our slides is Colorado's Strategic Wildfire Action Program, or COSWAP, which is a new program at the DNR. And one of the aspects of that program is working with the Colorado Youth Corps Association, which is a nonprofit, to essentially train a more robust workforce in the wildfire mitigation space. And so that's been a really key partnership. And I think, obviously, partnerships with NGOs will remain critical as we go forward.
I would also say, just building off of that, is that in my experience, the NGOs have been the boots on the ground to motivate the people to actually want to do something. The education and all the different governmental levels is essential to inform it, but the actually motivating to get it going, in my experience, has been primarily from the NGO communities, which has been helpful.
So I guess kind of building on that vein in terms of, for, again, the more practitioner-focused folks in the audience, in terms of, so Nate, you obviously touched on the Navigator, a couple of these federal resources. Do you have a sense in terms of, if you're trying to start putting together some of these pieces, like what, I guess, in your opinion, has been sort of, or what you've sort of seen has been sort of successful, or Amy, others panel as well, in terms of, how we start kind of tackling this idea of like a project pipeline in Colorado, or sort of the value of that concept, sort of what that means potentially. And, I guess ultimately, with funding of this size, does it kind of make sense for Colorado to kind of work more in unison across, sort of boundaries and sectors in terms of, leveraging some of these bigger pools of funding?
I'm happy to start, and maybe I'll answer it, your 5-point question, however I want. I think the technical assistance funding is really going to make an impact in getting projects ready to go in the pipeline. But I did, for the practitioners here today, pull some of the most common feedback we hear from our federal partners for funding opportunities, like Karen said, that are pretty prescriptive of exactly what they want to see, their point systems, how do you work through and navigate those processes? So I thought I would share just, here are some of the tips we've been sharing with some of our water users on the West Slope. And some of these are pretty simple reminders of just how to navigate these federal funding processes. And so I mentioned earlier, especially for watershed projects, the project benefits need to be clearly articulated and ideally quantified. And so they want to see hard numbers. And so it's beyond just a well-designed project. It's really selling what are the multiple benefits for the project. Again, projects are most successful if they are tied to a larger regional plan or a collaborative process. And I think that's something Colorado has done really well with stream management plans, with the basin implementation plans, that we've set up a great process to be able to tie these projects back to planning efforts. These projects are going to be scored on their readiness to proceed. So again, they're looking at how close are you to shovel ready. They want to see, where is the project location? What are the detailed timelines? What are your matching fund sources? So the more detailed you can show that your project is ready to go if you receive federal funding, the more points you'll receive in that category. And this is maybe an obvious one of, again, because these are a lot of these funding opportunities, especially if you look at the Bureau's Water Smart programs, their point scales is make sure your level of effort is proportional or in line with the point scales for each section. So if you have a 50-point section that you've only written 3 sentences, that's not a good idea. So really take a close look at how are they going to score these different sections. Ensure all landowners are supportive of your project and ideally include letters of support. Ensure you're considering environmental and cultural compliance issues at the get-go, because again, with federal funding, they're going to have to look at those issues. And maybe again, one of the more obvious points that is don't take anything for granted and explain everything. And so you have reviewers from potentially across the country at these federal levels that are reviewing these applications. And so you may know that your community is experiencing these levels of drought, or you may know you have these historic mining impacts, but you need to explain that in detail for these reviewers that may not know the issues that you face in this specific watershed. And so that's been a great advice that while seems obvious when you're writing these grants, is a good tip to be at the forefront of your mind. So those are just a few that I pulled for today.
And I'll just add to that too. I've been talking to a lot of potential applicants about our local capacity side of things, and that's sort of building on that has been my guidance to them as they're preparing their application to us. And what do you need to fund to get there is really dig into that federal program. What are those requirements? What do you need to do? And sort of back out your scope from there so that you are in a really solid place here. You maximizing our local capacity dollars to really get to that end result that you need so that you're as competitive as possible. And don't sort of short side any of those particular items in that task list.
Well, I guess before we head to audience Q&A, I guess, one interesting piece of feedback that I think we've been kind of getting, as we kind of market some of these resources, more just, I think I don't know, I can't speak for everyone in this room, but applying for these federal grants can be very time consuming, very arduous. You can get penalized for things you maybe weren't even clear about. So we certainly heard a lot of feedback on great, there's a lot of federal funding. Applying for federal funding is terrible. So I guess for those folks in the room that have either had bad experiences with this in the past, or are kind of maybe on the fence on okay, great, I'll just kind of stick to my water plan grants, any sort of closing thoughts in terms of why this might be a little bit different and why this is a kind of a really unique opportunity, I think, to maybe start thinking about these federal opportunities in more detail. Amy, you touched on some of this, so feel free to weigh in again, or others, in terms of just kind of maybe hammering home the unprecedentedness of this potentially again for the audience.
I think what I'll say is that we have all eyes on the Colorado River right now. I mean, conferences are starting to get really interesting because tensions are high and there's a lot, people are really understanding that we're in crisis mode and we need to move faster. And I think these federal dollars, with the scale that they provide, can allow that if we work together and recognize that urgency. And so at the Colorado River District, we are always hitting home that we are the Colorado River headwaters. We are the first link in an immense chain of 40 million people, 7 states, 30 federally recognized tribes. all of our national parks along the way, that we cannot fail in this, and we have to start looking at these projects with a sense of urgency. And we have dollars on the table that had previously been the barrier of where are we going to find the funding. Now that's here, and so we need to work together to figure out how to navigate those funding streams and, again, get projects going on the ground.
Build on what Amy is saying there. The unprecedentedness of this is that there is a huge crisis on the Colorado River. There's also huge crises in a number of other basins within our state. But facing that crisis without any funding and tensions are high. But I can only imagine how much higher they would be if we're like, we can't do anything either. So there's an opportunity here. Now if we can land it, we might be able to calm the tensions a little bit to actually get to some solutions. So it's hopeful, but we got to do it.
Yeah, agreed with Karen, and I think we're thinking about it in similar ways. Obviously, applying for federal funds is daunting, but the problems that we're trying to solve with that funding are even more daunting. And so I think there's certainly the application process is a much lesser evil than the problems we're trying to solve with it.
Especially when you kind of hear the chatter that we might not see anything of this scale again in the near term anyways, kind of making this money count. So I think with that, we're happy to take some audience Q&A if anyone has any. I see Chris in the background. Maybe we can kind of warm up the audience there. Yeah.
We'll come around with the mics, and just a quick request to make your questions brief and make sure there's a question in it.
Hope that wasn't directed at me. Just building on the questions that you guys have been asking, there's a lot of NGOs in the room, of course, smaller NGOs, and when you have this one-time pot of money, it doesn't support new staff. But what I'm hearing is it can support help. So I'm thinking, how can we connect, for example, grant writers that are up to speed on all these requirements with the NGOs in this room? Is there an opportunity to kind of get the collective mindset of our grant writers where it needs to be so that they're firing real sharp and then spread them out to help everybody out? Thank you.
I didn't plant Chris, but I'm going to thank him for the question. The Colorado River Sustainability Campaign helps coordinate a number of larger NGOs, and in that we have got on contract now grant writers and technical help as well for that specific purpose, to designate, to contact the smaller NGOs and the people who are on the ground, to give them the capacity in the same way that the state and the river district at the local and regional levels are. But from an NGO community, if there needs to be help, then the community, the big NGOs like TNC and EDF and TRCP and all of them are able to work with them and notify them and then connect them to our grant writers that we have under specific contract for that specific purpose, is an example.
And I'll just add to that also, within the CWCB technical assistance grants, we are hoping to have grant writers available through that effort too. But I guess I would also open up to this audience, if you all have great grant writers that you're connected with, and we can sort of keep them on a resource list, so as people are applying to us for those direct local capacity grants, I'd be happy to sort of share that information with folks who call us sort of, pre-application time, saying, gosh, what resources do I need? If we can just even provide a list of names, I think that would be a really good resource. So I'm happy, I think you all will have my contact information through the conference materials, and happy to collect that and distribute that as best we can.
Thanks. Do you know if there's any specific initiatives to help with technical assistance for tribes?
There's definitely been talk about it, and I think it's in a way it's coordinating with the tribes to identify whether and how they want technical assistance. There are some collaboratives that are helping identify people or asking the question and then trying to identify the resources for them. I don't know specifically what those have been set up to do yet, and it's obviously on a tribe-by-tribe basis. In Colorado, I think we have the two main tribes, at least in the Colorado River, are Ute, Mountain Ute, and Southern Ute. And I would say to CWCB's credit and DNR's credit, they have developed great relationships with both tribes, and I think they can work with the programs that Anna and them have set up as well.
Yeah, in fact, I've had communications with the tribes already about some local capacity grants directly to them to help. And then Nate mentioned that the Bureau of Reclamation also is doing webinars that should help with that effort too. So but we're certainly a resource.
Yeah, and I think, Nate, you had it on your slide, but there's bill.gov. That's sort of the White House's or the administration sort of information hub for the infrastructure law, and it does actually have a sort of specific tribal playbook in terms of like outlining what those programs are. There's also a rural one and a few other resources there, but there's a really great sort of online sort of clearinghouse for a lot of that information as well.
Yeah, and as Anna mentioned, the Bureau of Reclamation, as they've been sort of doing outreach on all of the infrastructure investments, they've been doing a series of webinars. They've been doing one for states and then one for tribes, so giving a tribal lens on all of the programs that they're implementing. And those are, I believe, posted on their website to go browse at any point.
For the local government and state grants, for how long are you planning on making those funds available in terms of years? And are there discussions or plans for either evaluating them and seeking additional funds to continue those programs into the future? Or I'm just curious to hear about sort of the longevity of those programs.
So currently we had an appropriation through a bill last legislative session that appropriated ARPA funds, which do have that short fuse of the 2 years to get those under contract and 4 years to spend. So right now that's our focus, is sort of that near term. We haven't had discussions about long-term sustainability of a program like that, but I think largely we'll sort of measure the success. I think part of that also is the fact that there are these unprecedented dollars to apply for. So once those opportunities go away, I don't know how effective an ongoing program would be, so it's something we'll probably have to evaluate as we go.
And I'll just add quickly for our accelerator grants, we're still entertaining those on a case-by-case basis. Part of the reason to have an application deadline earlier this summer was, again, to shine a light on this is something we're interested in funding. And we knew, working closely with the state, it would take time to get the technical assistance grants through the legislature and then get them up and running. And so we saw a pretty critical time gap to fill to get these projects moving so that they're then ready with some of the design and technical work to be ready to apply when these funding opportunities open in 2023. So we're likewise considering it on an ongoing basis, and right now seeing how we can best partner with the money that the state has available for the technical assistance grants.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the IIJA requires 40% to go to disadvantaged communities. Is that correct? Funding, is that, are we tracking that in the state, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the Justice 40 initiative.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think across all of the funding buckets in the IIJA, that requirement exists. And so, we're already doing this for American Rescue Plan dollars that the state has, but we're tracking implementation by county, by census tract, and really working to, constantly apply that lens to funding decisions, but also tracking, in retrospect where funds have gone. So, yes.
I believe at the federal level is the Council of Environmental Quality. CEQ is the one tracking that. I think there is like an online tracker there as well. But yeah, in short, I think there's still that protocol I think is still being developed to some extent in terms of how those funds are being tracked to the ground.
Yeah, and all of that is essentially baked into our reporting process between the state and the federal government. So, we're tracking it at the state level, but reporting that to the federal government.
I'm just curious, is there any requirement, or better yet, funding in any of these buckets to do post-project monitoring so that we can evaluate what works and what doesn't work, so that down the road we have a better sense of that? This seems like an opportunity to do a lot of that post-project monitoring.
I don't think it's precluded. I think it's how the project is built out. And I think, I'm speculating here because I haven't had to fill it out, but if you're applying for a grant and if you don't have monitoring in it in some way, shape, or form, it could be docked.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it would be rare where that wouldn't be an acceptable use of funds, if not a requirement of funding.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just kind of add a little bit. I mean, then particularly the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, the way that it went through a budget reconciliation process, which basically it had to like thread this needle where it wasn't too complicated. It wasn't authorizing new things. Therefore, like the language itself is like pretty open-ended. I mean, you saw the text a little bit with that $4 billion. The BLM funding, for example, basically just says $250 million for conservation and restoration on BLM lands, period. So I think what we're kind of looking ahead at a little bit is, given how open-ended some of that like language is, we could maybe kind of like talk to the agencies and basically say like we would want to maybe kind of see more of the project spectrum covered with these funds, since it doesn't necessarily like, explicitly preclude them on the front end. So I think, especially with this new funding and IRA, I think there is more opportunity to kind of fund this like full life cycle of the whole project process, including some of that post-project monitoring. But that will require, I think, letting these agencies like hear that and that there's a need for that.
So with this big, massive state effort that's going on right now around the Colorado Water Plan update, what do you see as the intersection for us as a state advancing projects that relates to the conversation we're having right now?
I think that largely ties back to even our capacity grants. That goal of those really is to advance projects that align with the water plan that also can then leverage all of those federal dollars. So I think that's largely the lens by which we're going to be reviewing applications that come through to us, and as we're meeting with applicants pre-application, sort of coaching that to say, what are the benefits? We've got these metrics in the water plan that we're trying to achieve, so make sure that you show us what you're trying to achieve. What are those measurable results, the multi-objective opportunities, all the things that we've kind of talked about today.
Anybody? All right. Oh.
First of all, very fascinating discussion. I really appreciate it. One of the things that I was struck by was the fact that we already have a House bill in place to provide funding for match, which just seems like that's a challenging thing for local entities to come up with. How many other states have done that, and how competitive does that make Colorado in general? Like a lot more competitive, or are all the states doing something like that?
So I can't give a real answer to that because I don't know. I haven't heard of other states that have actually set aside funds in this way, but that does not mean that it hasn't happened. And I think it's a really encouraging step to increase our competitiveness. As I said a bit earlier, I don't think anyone involved in that bill thinks that $80 million covers the need for the next 10 years. And so there's already conversations about what's the next stage of this look like. I'd also say that so many existing state grant programs can be used to serve as that match. So the Water Plan Grant Program requires a match itself. A Water Smart grant requires a match. Those can be harmonized to work together towards an end. And so those funds that are set aside are specifically for either state agencies applying for funds that need a match or local governments. And so that does leave out nonprofits, but there are many other places to go across the state to help meet that matching need.
Also just say that I think it's extremely important and helpful for Colorado to have this program, because while other states might not be up and ready like this, there are huge organizations in other states. A big state to the west is one I'm thinking of specifically that can provide the matches left and right. And so to be able to have the capacity to do accelerator grants and get it up and running, and then have the matching capacity already ready, we are better positioned to play with the very big organizations.
And I'll just add, with all that said, these are obviously great resources, and Colorado's in the River District are taking some steps. None of it's automatic, right? We still have to go out and apply for these funds. We got to be aggressive about these funds. It's not there are some formulaic funds in IIJA, but for the most part, a lot of this is competitive. So I think it is on the community at large too to kind of take advantage of these resources now that we do have them. to actually sure that we do actually track some of these funds to the ground. I think that's what's going to ultimately make Colorado competitive here as we use the tools that we currently have.
Can I call on myself? Did anyone else have another? I wanted to take the opportunity to prep us for the next plenary where we bring up some technical experts. So as a practitioner, whenever I hear shovel ready, I kind of start hyperventilating. And so I really appreciate that you right off the bat said there's technical assistance. I think that could help a lot because we could prioritize what's ready instead of what's really needed. And the practitioner side is the opposite of encouraging a whole lot of analysis that might be needed in the complex areas. So I'm trying to turn it into a question. Do you think, I think it was 4 million that you have for the technical assistance, 5 million, which will go fast. Do you think 10, 50, or 90% of projects proponents will come in and ask for that?
So I think we're waiting to see what will come in the door. I think seeing what came in the door for the River District's Accelerator Grant is a good indication of the type of demand that might be there statewide. I've certainly heard anecdotally in conversations I've had that there is a lot of demand. And I think the River District granted out about everything that they had available. And so, I think that speaks to the level of demand.
Yeah, I think we saw a huge need, and we had a really tight window of when we asked for these applications. I mean, we gave folks about 6 to 8 weeks. So these projects were already mobilized and had gone through some of the stakeholder work that is pre these accelerator grants. So I think we've been clear that accelerator grants isn't solving every barrier. There's still, the earlier steps of getting a coalition of partners together, getting some of the planning efforts done. But again, we did see pretty incredible momentum for just a regional piece of Colorado that we're hoping really provides the next step to go with the state program, look at how we can leverage those dollars, especially with the time clock that's on them, and really demonstrate that there might be a long-term need to really fill these early technical stages to get these projects to right. How do you get a project to shovel ready with not a lot of grant funding that's willing to step up for those pieces?
I would say one other group that should, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I know if they start to see things are working, or that there's a need, B, it will have good results, and that they can help, is philanthropy. I think philanthropy can also help in a lot of ways provide the technical, funding for contracting the technical assistance if and when needed.
Yep, and I guess I'll just add one more comment to that too. In some of the conversations I've had on the local capacity grants, it is with folks who are looking at prioritization first and then finding projects. So I think there's we can do both, right? And I think some of those more shovel ready might have a smaller grant request because to get that federal application in is a fairly small lift. But some of that prioritization work might be a larger request on our side. But I think there's still benefit when we get to the end of that, whether or not it's successful in getting the federal dollars. We now know a lot about these projects, and maybe there's opportunities within other state funds, within the water plan, WSRF, like other opportunities. So I think there's going to be a multitude of benefits regardless.
We're going to need to wrap up and go on to break, you guys, but we have an opportunity to hear a little bit more from Alex along with our Plenary 2 speakers during a roundtable discussion that we'll have at the end of that session. But just please join me in giving these folks a round of applause for all the work they're doing. And we really appreciate you guys for bringing this conversation to us today and for all the work that you're doing to advance this funding for the state of Colorado. You guys, we have a very brief break scheduled, just 15 minutes to use the restroom, grab a drink, and please come back promptly at 3 o'clock to your seats so we can get started with our Plenary 2 speakers. Thank you so much.